father's thrones, of course, except for the Macraes, wild Macraes, who were such staunch supporters of the Mackenzies that they were nicknamed Mackenzie's shirt of mail. The Mackenzies emerged as the most influential clan in Westeros, with their principal seat at Brahan Castle. The early 16th century saw many a bloody affray centred round Aileen Donan. Ian Mackenzie had great difficulty in taking possession of his inheritance. At the time, Aileen Donan was held by an uncle of the chief who was murdered in 1498. Ian, his half-brother, succeeded him, which was not at all to the liking of his uncle, who stubbornly maintained he was illegitimate and refused to allow him in. It took an order from the Privy Council for the castle to be opened up to the new chief. With so many strongholds to maintain, the Mackenzies decided to put a reliable keeper or constable in charge of Aileen Donan, and who better to trust than their enthusiastic loyal supporters, the Macraes. In 1539, the castle was attacked by Donald Gorm. For some reason, Aileen Donan had been left with only 3 men to garrison it. The rest were off on a raid in support of some other fighting clans. Donald heard how weakly it was defended, and as he had cast covetous eyes on it, on several occasions he saw his chance. He set sail from Skye with 50 galleys. Naturally, the defenders hurriedly barricaded themselves in, and so securely that Donald was frustrated. He called for the masts from his ships to be dismantled to use as battering rams. First, he told the castle to find its weakest point. A Macrae defender had used all his arrows but one, but saw his chance and fired it at Donald. Straight to its target it went, embedding itself in Donald's foot. Impatiently, Donald pulled it out, severing an artery in the process. He died shortly after. The attempt to take the castle failed. In the 15 uprising, the Mackenzies were embroiled on the Jacobite side. The Earl had to flee to France with the Old Pretender. Back he came, though in 1719, with a small company of Spanish mercenaries. Everything seemed to go wrong with this little-known half attempt to restore a Stuart to the throne. It never really got off the ground, for the English were smart off the mark. 3 frigates sailed up the loch and bombarded the castle into submission, and left it in ruins. For 200 years it remained in this state, until a representative of the correspondent of Dr. Lee about the reality of the noises at Glamis Castle. On one occasion, some years ago, the head of the family, with several companions, was determined to investigate the cause. One night, when the disturbance was greater and more violent and alarming than usual, and it should be premised, strange, weird and unearthly sounds had often been heard, and by many persons, some quite unacquainted with the ill repute of the castle. His lordship went to the haunted room, opened the door with a key, and dropped back in a dead swoon into the arms of his companions, nor could he ever be induced to open his lips on the subject afterwards. A well-known antiquary furnishes the following local legend connected with the old stronghold to account for the sights and noises heard about it. He states that the tradition is that in olden time, during one of the constant feuds between the Lindsays and the Ogilvies, a number of the latter clan, flying from their enemies, came to Glamis Castle and begged hospitality of the owner. He did not like to deny them the shelter of his castle walls, and therefore admitted them, but on the plea of hiding them, so it is averred, he secured them all in a large out-of-the-way chamber, that afterwards known as the Haunted One, and there left them to starve. Their bones lie there till this day, according to the common tradition, their bodies never having been removed. It has been suggested that it was the sight of these which so startled the late Lord Strathmore on entering the room, and which caused him subsequently to have it walled up. The scene is believed to have been particularly horrifying, some of the unfortunate captives having died apparently in the act of gnawing the flesh from their arms. Thus much for the tradition that accounts for the weird disturbances which, if Dr. Lee's correspondence may be credited, were still in a state of activity not very long ago. Among other strange instances, the writer states that, on one occasion, a lady and her child were staying for a few days at the castle. The child was asleep in an adjoining dressing room, and the lady, having gone to bed, lay awake for a while. Suddenly, a cold blast stole into the room, extinguishing the nightlight by her bedside, but not affecting the one in the dressing room beyond, in which her child had its cot. By that light she saw a tall, mailed figure pass into the dressing room from that in which she was lying. Immediately thereafter there was a shriek from the child. Her maternal instinct was aroused. She rushed into the dressing room and found the child in an agony of fear. It described what it had seen as a giant who came and leant over its face. We are unable to learn when this disturbing apparition appeared, but it is to be hoped not since Lord Strathmore had the haunted room walled up. That it is most devoutly to be hoped, shut in all unpleasant sights, even if it could not quite suppress the sounds. The legends invested in this immense and ancient palace of Glamis Castle are inexhaustible. In point of antiquity and historical interest, the castle is one of the most remarkable edifices in the kingdom. Although assassins. The Glamis estates first came into possession of the Lyon family in 1371, when Sir John Lyon, feudal baron of Fortevist, secretary and son-in-law to Robert II, received the grant of the lordship from that monarch. A long series of tragedies, we are informed, overgloomed the Lyons, from the moment they brought to Glamis the Lion Cup, the original of Scott's blessed bear of Bradwardy, and a kind of family palladium like the look of Eden Hall. Sir John Lyon, who was Great Chamberlain of Scotland, fell in a duel in 1383. His son, the grandson of King Robert II, married his cousin, another grandchild of the same monarch, and, unlike many inheritors of the estate, died a natural death. His son was raised to the dignity of the peerage in 1445 as Lord Glamis, and for some generations the Lyons lived and died in peace. The widow of the sixth Lord, Janet Douglas, a daughter of the Earl of Angus, together with her son Lord Glamis and other relatives, was indicted for attempting the life of King James V by witchcraft. Lady Glamis was found guilty on evidence afterwards confessed to have been fabricated, and, horrible to relate, was burnt to death on the Castle Hill, Edinburgh, in 1537. The son of this unfortunate lady, having been respited till of age, was ultimately released and restored to his honours and estates. In 1578, John, 8th Lord Glamis, was slain in an accidental encounter with the Lindsays, the hereditary enemies of his race. In the following century, an earldom, first of Kinghorn and then of Strathmore and Kinghorn, was conferred upon the ruler of Glamis. The grandson of the first earl was slain at Sheriffmuir in 1715, and his brother and successor Charles died on the 11th of May 1728 in consequence, say the peerages, of an accidental wound received in a scuffle. According to the common story, however, his death was brought about in a duel over the gaming table. One authority relates it thus: in all the year round. The old feud between Lindsays and Lyons had so far healed over that the members of the two families dined and drank and diced together like fine old Scottish gentlemen as they were. According to local tradition, the play one night at Glamis was very high, and when its owner had lost all his money, he staked his estates, one after the other, against the victorious player. At last, Glamis itself was set on the turn of a card, and lost. Then the head of the house, maddened by his losses, accused his guest of cheating. The reply was a blow. Swords were drawn, and after a few passes, the victorious guest ran Lord Strathmore fox and hound, for it was the Lord's day, and that means complete abstinence from all worldly pursuits in bonny Scotland. And at last, with oaths and curses, he called for a pack of cards, and comforted himself with the anticipation of a pleasant game. The ladies were at their devotions, so he called the servants to him one by one, but never since the days of the feast in the New Testament were so many excuses invented to cover disinclination. Of all those who had humoured him so often, not one could be found, from the steward to the scullion, to take a hand with the wicked Earl. In desperation, the chaplain was attacked, but he too proved temptation-proof, and strengthened the rebellion among the menials by branding the pack of cards as devil's bricks, and hurling terrible anathemas at the head of any wight who should venture on so terrible a desecration of the Sabbath. For a time there was dire confusion and alarm in the castle, and at last Earl Patty, swearing tremendously, and consigning everybody around him to an unmentionable locality, seized a pack of cards and went growling away up the old oak stairs to his chamber, saying he would play with the devil himself sooner than be thwarted in his desire. He had not sat long in the room before a knock came at the door, and a deep voice sounded from the corridor, asking the Earl if he wished a partner. "Yes," roared the Earl, "enter, in the foul fiend's name, whoever you are." And with that there entered a tall, dark stranger, wholly wrapped up in a cloak, who nodded in a familiar manner to the Earl, and took his seat on a vacant chair on the opposite side of the table. The Earl stared at his strange guest, and doubtless felt a momentary uneasiness as he remembered whom he had invited to play with him, but a look at the cards on the table reassured him, and they commenced the game in real earnest. The stranger, who did not remove his bonnet and cloak, proposed a high stake, and in reply the Earl said, if he were the loser, and had not wherewith to discharge his debt, he would sign a bond for whatever his guest might choose to ask. Fast and furious became the game. Loud oaths resounded through the chamber, and the terrified menials crept up the corridor, wondering what brave man dared to bandy words with the wicked Earl, and who was sinful enough to hold his hand at the devil's bricks on the Lord's day. As they fearfully listened, they could hear the fierce utterances of the Earl, and the fiercer and more unearthly utterances of the stranger, whose presence they were quite unable to account for. its version of this tradition is that the famous Earl Beardy, Earl of Crawford, of whom there is a portrait at Abbotsford, famous for his rebellion against James II of Scotland, and popularly known as the Wicked Laird, was playing cards in the castle and being warned to give over, as he was losing dreadfully, swore an oath that he would play till the day of judgment, whereupon the devil suddenly made his appearance, and as sudden disappearance with old Beardy and all his company. The room has never been found again, but the people believe firmly that old Beardy and his company are playing on, and will play till the day of judgment, and that on stormy nights the players are heard stamping and swearing in their rage over their play. But other and deeper mysteries than that told of Earl Patty or Beardy hover about that ancient and majestic castle. Those frowning towers, grey with age and sombre with time, hold within their strong walls tales of almost unspeakable terror, and within their gloomy rooms, if rumours speak true, terrible tragedies have been enacted. Glamis, which a well-known traveller describes as one of the finest specimens of feudal architecture now existing, and as combining in a striking manner the gloom of prison security with the grandeur of a palace, is not so supremely interesting to outsiders for its magnitude or magnificence, its historical connections, or its melancholy associations, as for the seemingly impenetrable mystery that belongs to it. The local legend of Earl Patty or Beardy will not account for what has been seen and heard. In 1880, a contributor to All the Year Round, whilst disclaiming all sympathy with ghost stories or mysteries of any kind, and declaring himself to be an utter sceptic as to all assumed supernatural manifestations, gave two strange incidents as given to him on good authority. The first narrative is told thus. A lady, very well known in London society, an artistic and social celebrity, wealthy beyond all doubts of the future, and what is called a very cultivated and instructed, but clear-headed and perhaps slightly matter-of-fact woman, went to stay at Glamis Castle for the first time. She was allotted very handsome apartments just on the point of junction between the new buildings, perhaps 100 or 200 years old, and the very ancient part of the castle. The rooms were handsomely furnished, no gaunt carvings grinned from the walls, no grim tapestry swung to and fro, making strange figures look still stranger by the flickering firelight. All was smooth, cosy, and modern, and the guest retired to bed without a thought of the mysteries of Glamis. In the morning, she appeared at the breakfast table, quite cheerful and self-possessed. To the inquiry how she had slept, she replied, "Well, thanks, very well, up to 4 o'clock in the morning, but your Scottish carpenters seem to come to work very early. I suppose they'd put up their scaffolding quickly, though, for they are quiet now." This speech produced a dead silence, and the speaker saw with astonishment that the faces of members of the family were very pale. She was asked, as she valued the friendship of all there, never to speak to them on that subject again. There had been no carpenters at Glamis Castle for months past. This fact, whatever it might be worth, is absolutely established. She knew, of course, that there were stories about Glamis, but had not the remotest idea that hammering that she had heard was connected with any story. She had regarded it simply as an annoyance, and was glad to get to sleep after an unrestful time, but had no notion of the noise being supernatural until informed of it at the breakfast table. To what particular event in the stormy annals of the Lion family the hammering is connected is quite unknown, except to members of the family, but there is no lack of legends, possible and impossible, to account for any sights or sounds in the magnificent old feudal edifice. This same writer, after alluding to many of the tragic stories connected with Glamis, including the romantic episode of the renowned Bowes abduction case, proceeds to step into the dim borderland which separates tradition from fiction. It is said, remarks this authority, that once a visitor stayed at Glamis Castle for a few days, and, sitting up late one moonlight night, saw a face appear at the window opposite to him. The owner of the face, it was very pale, with great sorrowful eyes, appeared to wish to attract attention, but vanished suddenly from the window, as if plucked suddenly away by superior strength. For a long while the horror-stricken guest gazed at the window, in the hope that the pale face and great sad eyes would appear again. Nothing was seen at the window, but presently horrible shrieks penetrated even the thick walls of the castle and rent the night air. An hour later, a dark-huddled figure like that of an old, decrepit woman, carrying something in a bundle, came into the waning moonlight and presently vanished. This writer hints at a very dreadful deed to explain the cause of this apparition, but for some reason or the other evades connecting the two tales by any intelligible method. He adds, however, that there is a more modern story of a stonemason having been engaged at Glamis Castle on an important occasion, and having discovered, or been suspected of discovering, more than he should have done, was supplied with a handsome competency upon the conditions that he emigrated, and preserved inviolable secrecy as to what he had learned. This writer continues: the employment of a stonemason is explained by the conditions under which the mystery is revealed to successive heirs and factors. The abode of the dread secret is in a part of the castle also haunted by the apparition of a bearded man who flits about at night, but without committing any other objectionable action. What connection, if any, the bearded spectre may have with the mystery is not even guessed. He hovers at night over the couches of children for an instant and then vanishes. The secret itself abides in a room, a secret chamber, the very situation of which, beyond a general idea that it is in the most ancient part of the castle, is unknown. Where walls are 15 feet thick, it is not impossible to have a chamber so concealed that none but the initiated can guess its position. It was once attempted by a madcap party of guests to discover the locality of the secret chamber by hanging their towels out of windows, and thus deciding in favour of any window from which no spotless banner waved. But this escapade, which is said to have been ill-received by those most interested, ended in nothing but a vague conclusion that the old square tower must be the spot sought. It seems to have been forgotten by these harum-scarum mystery hunters that a secret chamber might well be like the curious places of concealment called priests' holes, so common in old English country houses, and the only mystery whereof is how the unfortunate hidden tenants could breathe in them. It is in the secret chamber of Glamis Castle that the mystery is revealed to the next heir, and to the new factor when one is appointed. This much is known beyond all possible doubt. It is also assumed from the stonemason story and the mysterious sounds frequently heard that the secret chamber is approached by a passage duly closed with masonry after every visit. This latter conclusion may or may not be correct, but the existence of a mystery of some kind concealed within a secret chamber is fairly well made out. No wonder that this writer asks, and many others repeat the question, what is this mystery? Of all the many attempted hypotheses, not one may be deemed conclusive, but few probable, or even possible. It has been suggested, contrary to the proven facts, if proof were needed, that the beautiful and unfortunate Lady Glamis, the supposed witch, the victim of acknowledged perjury, who perished amid the flames on Castle Hill at Edinburgh, was actually in commerce with the evil one, and that her familiar demon, an embodied and visible fiend, endures unto this day, shut from the light, in Glamis Castle. Another wild suggestion is that owing to some hereditary curse, like those believed to rest on many well-known families, at certain intervals a kind of vampire is born into the family of the Strathmore lions. It is scarcely possible to destroy this monstrosity. It is therefore kept concealed till its term of life is run. But it might be remembered, even monsters need nourishment, and this secret chamber at Glamis is only visited once in a generation. Other theories and suggestions are equally unfortunate, and no probable solution of the mystery has yet been given. Thus far, we have shown that strange sights and stranger sounds are reported upon good authority to have been seen and heard at Glamis. Moreover, it may be assumed that there is a family secret concealed within the depths of the old castle, and that the facts about it are never known to more than 3 persons. The 3 persons who have to hide within their bosoms this grim secret are the Earl of Strathmore, for the time being, the heir apparent, if he have attained his majority, and the factor, or, as he might be termed in England, the house steward. On the night before he attains his 21st birthday, the heir, who bears the courtesy title of Lord Glamis, is solemnly initiated in the terrible mystery by the reigning Earl. exposed any inkling of the mystery of Glamis. As a Strathmore succeeds, there is generally much talk of the old story being exploded at last. Gay gallants in lace ruffles, beans, bucks, bloods and dandies have until their 21st birthday made light of the family mystery, and some have gone so far as to make after-dinner promises to hoist the old ghost with his own petard, and tell the whole stupid old story in the smoking room at night, after the coming of age humbug was all over. This promise has been made more than once, but it has never been kept. No heir to the Strathmore peerage has revealed the secret. On the morrow, when all looked for an explanation of the terrible mystery, they were met by a courteous but cold refusal, a simple statement that the fulfilment of the rash promise was impossible, a request to say no more about it, and thus the matter has ended, and so the mystery of Glamis Castle remains a mystery still. This has been Kate at the Library of Whispers, saying I shall see you very soon. Bye bye for now.